You're listening to an event from the U.S. Institute of Peace, part of the USIP podcast network. For more information about our work around the world, visit usip.org and check us out on social media.
Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome. My name is Susan Stigant, and I am the director of the programs at the Africa Center at the United States Institute of Peace, which was established by the U.S. Congress in 1984 as a national, nonpartisan public institution dedicated to helping prevent, mitigate, and resolve conflict abroad. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to the United States Institute of Peace for this virtual public event. Today, we will discuss the devastating crisis in Sudan with a focus on the violence in Darfur, the steps that are already being taken to monitor and document that violence, the steps to prevent and address further atrocities, and the further steps and action that needs to be taken. We are grateful to be joined today by many Sudanese friends, colleagues, and the general public, as well as those from the United States and beyond, who have worked in the country in support of the revolution, of the civilian government, and the courageous struggle for peace, freedom, and justice for so many decades. Allow me to acknowledge that this is a topic that is deeply personal for many joining us today. We extend our condolences for those friends, family members, and Sudanese who have been lost in this fight. And we extend our solidarity with those who are seeking safety within or outside the country and working in the most difficult of circumstances to relieve the suffering caused by the war and to silence the guns. For more than 100 days, Sudan has been in war. More than 3 million people have been displaced at the latest count. In many ways, the deaths are uncounted, but some of the latest numbers suggest that well over 10,000 have been killed in Darfur alone. The humanitarian situation is devastating in Khartoum and across other parts of the country, in the border areas for those who are seeking to leave, as well as those who are seeking safety outside. The level, the scale, and the type of violence is in some ways unprecedented, and in other ways echoes some of the worst times in Sudan's own history. Indeed, there are multiple efforts to stop the war coming from many capitals across Africa, in the near region, and around the world. However, none of those has yet got traction that has succeeded in halting the violence or imagining a path back towards a more stable, peaceful, and free Sudan. Today, we will focus on some of the courageous and innovative work that is taking place to put a spotlight on the consequences of this fighting, as well as the courageous work that's taking place to respond and alleviate the suffering and to ensure that the atrocities and the violence taking place won't spread further. Allow me now to introduce Jawhratelkaml Kanu, who works with USIP's programming in East Africa and leads USIP's programming on nonviolent action in Sudan, to take you through the conversation and introduce our panelists for today. Jawhara, over to you.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you for the introduction, and happy to be here today among such a distinguished panel, welcoming all the audience joining us from across the world. As you mentioned, Susan, the ongoing war in Sudan has just crossed its 100-day mark. In this period, both the areas witnessing direct fighting and host communities in relatively safer areas have witnessed a huge struggle in provision of shelter, food, and health services. While it's still challenging to count the casualties, as you mentioned, according to recent stats by the IOM, the number of the displaced across Sudan has risen to more than 2.5 million people in all states, while those who have crossed the border to neighboring countries rose to more than 800,000 people. Both groups displaced in and outside Sudan are severely struggling with relocation and resettlement. Additionally, the widespread violence in Darfur brings back the horrors of the early 2000s. Reports confirm mass atrocities, ethnic-based targeting, and extremely dire humanitarian conditions, as some of the communities are witnessing a second or even a third round of targeted attacks and displacement. Additionally, in their 100 Days of Conflict report, the U.S. Conflict Observatory network has outlined that the current war has had devastating impact on the social situation in Sudan. Not only has the conflict resulted in widespread displacement, loss of lives, and the destruction of homes and communities, it has also deepened social divisions and tensions as different groups are drawn into the conflict. In terms of various actors in the civic space, since the outbreak of the armed conflict between the ASAF and RSF in April 2023, at least 2 journalists have lost their lives and approximately 75 homes belonging to journalists have been raided and looted. 6 journalists have been harassed, tortured, and injured. Additionally, 12 media companies were banned from publishing, as reported by the Africa Center for Justice and Peace Studies. The situation for human rights monitors and defenders weren't any better, as they have been witnessing direct targeting, which led to killings, torture, and forced exile or disappearance. From a different angle, the Combating Violence Against Women and Children unit monitored 108 cases of sexual violence against women and girls in Khartoum, Niala, and Jinena within the first 100 days of the outbreak of the war, with actual numbers forecasted to be much more higher. The past period have also witnessed many mediation and political consultation rounds, as you mentioned, Susan, from Jeddah to Addis Ababa, Cairo, Nairobi, and even Lomé, leaving many citizens confused about the future of a mediated solution. From a different side, the Sudanese civil society on the other end have been coming up with numerous initiatives, latest of which is the Declaration of Principles of Civil Actors for Ending the War and Restoring Democracy in Sudan, which was endorsed by 75 civil society bodies. In our discussion today, I'm hoping to engage with some of the existing monitoring and reporting mechanisms, their gaps, challenges, and what actions can be taken to move closer towards preventing atrocities. And on the panel today, I'm delighted to host 3 distinguished panelists who are at the core of monitoring, reporting, and analyzing the ongoing events in Sudan. The first panelist, Mahasin Dahab, Sudan's program manager at the Sudanese Archive, which operates under the umbrella of Mnemonic, and is led by Sudanese human rights defenders, researchers, lawyers, and lobbyists with a primary mission to document, verify, and raise awareness about Sudan's numerous human rights violations through powerful open source methods. My second guest would be Caitlin Howarth from the Sudan Conflict Observatory, which was officially launched in June and is using commercial satellite imagery and open source data analysis to remote monitoring activities of the warring parties. This effort is a collaboration among geographic information system companies, ISRI and PlanetScape AI, as well as the Yale University's Humanitarian Research Lab. And last but not least, Quscondy Albdelshafie, a senior regional advisor at Freedom House, with over a decade of experience working on human rights, governance, and peace building and atrocity monitoring prevention. Welcoming you all and looking forward to a fruitful discussion. I would like to remind our audience who are joining on the both Arabic and English extremes is that it's okay to post questions in Arabic. Our team is ready to provide translation both ways. Mahasin, many traditional sources like TV and radio stations, newspapers, and international media agencies are unable to access credible data. The Sudanese Archive is verifying open source monitoring data and amplifying voices from across Sudan. What stands out in the reporting in terms of violence and mass atrocities that are taking place?
Thank you, Jawhara. Hello to everyone who are joining. So in the archive, we understand that we are not chasing news. We are human rights fact finders. We know that the digital archive we are hosting on Sudan presents personal, cultural, and emotional value. In addition, we understand that the digital archives contain evidence that could potentially be used in the pursuit of justice and accountability. The reporting by the Sudanese Archive stands out due to unique focus on verifying open source data and amplifying voices from across Sudan. The process employed by us involved meticulous verification techniques and ensures the credibility and accuracy of the information we present. This approach is crucial in the context where traditional sources often struggle to access reliable data. For us, throughout the past months, since the beginning of the war, we have noticed some patterns that are prevailing across Sudan. Those patterns are destruction of protected civilian infrastructure, forced migration, GBV, forced marriage, looting, and ethnocentric speech. We have also been noticing huge patterns of networks that are working specifically to distribute misinformation and disinformation on the Sudanese timeline. So thank you.
Thank you, Mahasin. And Caitlin, since you also use open source and satellite imagery, and since its launch on the 9th of June, the Sudan Conflict Observatory has published 5 situational reports that track the destruction of infrastructure, mobility, fire events, and population movements through open source satellite imagery. The Sudan Conflict Observatory has also recently issued a report with special focus on the region of Darfur. Based on your monitoring, are there any highlights that you could share?
Certainly, and thank you so much for having me today, especially with Mahasin and Quscondy. There are a number of things that we've been working on. Usually there's so much that we're investigating behind the scenes. I hope that people understand that what we're able to publish is usually just a fraction of the material that we're gathering at any one time. I know that's also something that Mahasin also deals with the archive. The amount of material that is present through open source versus the amount that we're able to verify and confirm is usually like very disparate. What we are currently working on, and I'm happy to be able to share with you all today, we're about to release a new report that will focus on the events in Khartoum from the 15th forward, from basically the beginning of the current conflict onward, that will parallel the report that we issued on Darfur. I think that what is important to note in these reports is that we're trying to, obviously our Sudan work is a bit distinct from the work that this team also does on Ukraine. In Ukraine, we also focus on longer term trends. In Sudan, we're trying to stay at the pace of the current conflict and at events. That's a challenging job for our team to do, since they're working really around the clock in order to try and keep pace. But it also speaks to the tempo of destruction and the taking of life that is happening. The sheer speed with which events are moving on the ground is really critical, and something that I'm going to come back to over the course of our discussion today, because it's important for us not only to understand that there are some very specific aspects to this conflict and to how the perpetrators of it are trying to impact the lives of civilians in certain areas, certain ethnic groups, and how they're trying to make sure that they're able to move the pieces as quickly as they can and shape dynamics as rapidly as possible before other actors might be able to step in. Over.
Thank you, Caitlin. And can you share some of these trends and highlights that you've been referring to, that you've been witnessing throughout your work in the past 2 months?
Certainly. So among the things that we've seen, we've looked at for example, the strong use of air power by Sudanese armed forces, particularly across Khartoum state. That has been one of their primary modalities, is to use the air power that they have to try and wrest control back from RSF and its allied forces wherever they can. There's also been some pretty compelling evidence that we've been able to demonstrate, and this has been in our last report on Darfur, where we showed the wholesale destruction of at least what we were able to document, 26 villages, and in several cases going into cities. That, of course, just over the past week, we've been able to document multiple additional. So if we were to update that report and put out more today, we'd probably be adding somewhere at least, between 4 to 6 additional locations with the same level of massive destruction, massive razing of villages, of homes, the wholesale destruction of means of supporting civilian life. That's the kind of thing where, especially in communities that are majority non-Arab, that's the kind of thing that is incredibly important to be keeping track of. especially given how highly concentrated those efforts are to move in a systematic and widespread manner. And I think it's important to note that we at least have found at Yale Humanitarian Lab that that this is consistent with crimes against humanity. Now, I do want to note that that is a finding that for us, our job is not to be lawyers on this. Our job is to find the data and to collect the evidence and present it in a manner that lawyers can use to then reach a legal determination. But it is crucial to appreciate that right now, there's in terms of the type of action that needs to be taken, the level of attention that is due to this conflict overall, especially the type of humanitarian intervention that is needed for civilian protection. We believe that the responsibility to act is clear, and it's quite manifest in all of the data and all of the findings that have been put out by any number of actors, not just us.
Thank you, Caitlin, and I second your point on the fact that we're all like different parts of the building blocks, and hoping that this platform and others would serve as a stepping stone to next steps that are going to be taken by other people, maybe specialized in law or other domains, in order to at least go back in track of achieving justice. Quscondy, you've been a while in the scene, you've been quite active, and you've been following events since the early days of the crisis in Darfur in the early 2000s. You've also worked specifically on atrocity prevention and justice related to Darfur. What are you listening for and tracking in the monitoring, reporting, and stories that are the warning signs and triggers for mass atrocities?
Yes, hi everyone, and thank you, Jawhara, for the questions. Thanks, audience, for tuning in today. Really good to catch up on a very sensitive but also, timely the events that are taking place in Sudan. As you say, Jawhara, Freedom House is being supporting civil society in different aspects, including, providing them grants, but supporting also through advocacy, human rights documentation. And as a result, one of our partners, the GISA and the Sudan Archive are here. And this is something that we are kind of been doing in the past many years. I think with regard to question of what are the risks to the atrocities, based on the information coming from our partners, but also, a person from Darfur who also personally follow this to what's happening to people so close to me personally. I think there is high risk for the atrocities, and not only just mass atrocities of all different kinds in Darfur at this moment. And this is coming in from how do the conflict in Khartoum transpired in Darfur in a different ways. And I think looking the conflict trends in Khartoum doesn't give you a deep understanding of the dynamics took place in Darfur. And this is, kind of showing the risk of the mass atrocities in several key points. First key point is the absence of the legitimate government. In Darfur, the major actor now is RSF. The Rapid Support Force controls almost 90% of the region. That includes the largest cities, but also all the space between it's a Chadian border in Al Junaina, all the way to Kas. And this shows that there is, where the state institutions have been destroyed, there is no any systemic ways to replace some sort of systems to act into the service security of the people. The most of the people in those zones are hostage to RSF. No communication, no transfer. And this is not only direct killing, but an intentional indirect killing by mass starvation. So the targeting of the hospital, medical facilities, targeting and looting of the markets and food stores. These are kind of destroying the means of survival of the community. And what that prepares in now and coming months is mass deaths and starvation. The second risk of the atrocity is the history. The conflict, if you see the map of the conflict and the cities from Al Junaina, Zalingi, Kas, Kutum, Kabia, shows, if you see the UN inquiry, Commission of Inquiry report in 2006, that referred the Darfur case to ICC through the UN Security Council, it follows the same map. The current conflict follows the same map. The systemic targeting, as Caitlin says, from rapid support force to their victims that are defined as ethnic tribes for African origins, that is Masalit in West Darfur, Fur, and the Gawas in the north. And I think the main targeting directed to this ethnic, meaning that the conflict in Khartoum doesn't have that aspect very strongly as it has in Darfur. The history of the mass atrocities that happened in 2003 and the current map that connects the same, and the impunity, lack of accountability and justice that have never happened in Darfur case, not even in the ICC, the case even that is still pending. So I think the risk of the impunity, lack of accountability, history of the atrocities create additional scenarios that mass atrocities that are happening in Al Junaina, but also in cities like Morni, are going to expand to other regions if actions is not taken as soon as possible. The other risk is, no communication. So all of these people are hostage. So the outside world doesn't know. The initiatives that are taken by, the observatory by Caitlin is very helpful and very useful. And I think it needs also a local, on-the-ground, timely information to be able to connect the dots to further create an evidence for an action. And that's why, the lack of the information and the absence of the direct and immediate information create additional risks. That, for instance, when the things happens, mostly in some of the areas, the information comes after 2 weeks, which is too late to react on, which is you also have lack of information on what happens in that 2 weeks before, because the routes are blocked, the communication are blocked, and it's very difficult to move from place to place. So that those are very much risk, and there are several triggers that can further complicate the situation. Over.
Thank you, Quscondy, for shedding light on the events that have been taking place in Darfur now and 20 years ago, and the similarities that are somewhat striking, that the same things are happening over and over again, even worse this time around. Mahasin, following up on the conversation, in this dynamic of conflict, we are seeing a lot of misinformation and disinformation. How can Sudanese and those joining us from Washington or other places around the world distinguish between credible information and rumor?
Thank you, Jawhara. So I am in the dynamic of this conflict. I think the weapon of social media has been used by both conflicting parties, and also in our culture in Sudan, we do have certain patterns of stories and spreading misinformation across easily. So my first. I'm going to do like a very brief technical of how we do it in the Sudanese archive. But also, I want to say first that we need to all check our biases, especially if you are Sudanese and you're working on Sudan. It's very easy for us as human rights defenders or humans that are working in the context to be coming in with our own biases and looking at information. So for us, what we do is that we cross-verify sources. We have a list of trusted sources. We have something that we call a source book. Those are accounts of people, organizations, government, our Sudanese Army, RSF, everyone. And we try to verify information from multiple resources before we think it's actually true. We check also the evidence and the data. So for us, we look for tangible evidence and verifiable data that support claims that of things that are being spread around on the social media. So we look for images, videos that are more likely to be trustworthy. We try to recognize bias and manipulation. We try to understand motives and patterns of behavior of people who are sharing the information, or accounts at least. That's going back into pages history, when it was founded, what are they using, what terminologies are they using, how are they describing events. We also try as much as we can to consider the context. For us, we try to understand the broader context of the conflict itself, the historical background, and we try to understand and always confirm the geopolitical situation. Because we understand that misinformation can thrive in complex environments where people lack comprehensive understanding of the situation. So misinformation can just thrive. One fact, one misleading information, and then you have a whole thing on social media. So we also try our best to consult with locals and our networks on the ground in Sudan. We try to engage with human rights activists, people from resistance committees, or anything. We don't do closed source, but we try to verify what we see by asking, if this happened, have you heard of it? Were you on the ground when? It is really difficult right now to try to differentiate, but for us, we rely on data, we rely on the technical expertise that the archive and mnemonic has to distinguish between facts and misinformation. And it takes longer for us because we are a very small team, we're a team of 3. But for everyone else in Washington and everyone who's working on Sudan, please use your mind and do not be certain on one source. Double check, verify, contact, reach out to us or Caitlin or anyone else, and we will be happy to assist.
Thank you, Mahasin. And indeed, we all have to be aware of our own biases as people who are working in Sudan or coming from different backgrounds. Caitlin, you've already shared a few highlights of the trends that you've been seeing over the past 2 months. I was wondering if you can share some of the findings of the reports that you guys have been sharing. I know the reports are available online, but I think it's also important if you can show some of these highlights and also share with us what does the Conflict Observatory do in order to mainstream the information that are being shared, and then coordinating and monitoring with those who are providing relief in the country.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for that question. So one of the things that we do, in addition to the work that we try to coordinate publicly with our releases, which we try to put out at least 1 report a week. That's the tempo that we're aiming for with public releases. We're also constantly working behind the scenes to try and coordinate with different partners. And I hope to try to be able to work much more closely with both Mahasin and Quscondy. And again, as Mahasin just said, please, anyone who is on this as part of this conversation, please do reach out to us. We'll make sure, my email at Yale, it's simply caitlin.howarth@yale.edu. Please do reach out to us if you have information or want to get in touch with us and develop a relationship. We're always working with different organizations and trying to make sure that information is passing back and forth. Some of those are journalists, some are humanitarian organizations. We have to be very careful and very respectful of those, especially those who are working with survivors and people who are eyewitnesses. There are a lot of incredibly brave people, brave Sudanese who have been getting information out of the country and uploading it as soon as they have the opportunity. Once they're in a safe place, and for some of them, just because they may have crossed over a border does not necessarily mean that they are safe. So we take their security and the security of that information that they've worked so hard to protect incredibly seriously. Among the things that we do, so not everything that we necessarily collect is something that we will publish because of that. We also try to make sure that everything that we can publish is something that is going to add unique value from a civilian protection perspective, and that it will not only have a military intelligence value. That's incredibly important to do when we're in the middle of an active conflict. So again, we have always more data than what we'll actually publish because we have to specifically edit out things where we have a concern that one of the armed parties would simply use it to advance their own agenda, and where it doesn't have a civilian protective value. One of the things I'm showing you right now, this is an interactive map that our team at Esri helped us to put together, showing some of the 26 communities that I spoke about. This is Misterai, and this shows some of the images. This is one of the before images that we have of Misterai before the raising event that really obliterates so much of this incredible place. Here, as you see it load, you'll see the devastation. This is just, I mean, to say that the town is really wiped out is putting it mildly. It's hard to appreciate. I think sometimes this is, some folks might look at this and say, well, how do you know exactly what has happened here? When you've looked at satellite imagery for over a decade, this is very, very stark. But I hope it's clear to anyone who saw that before image, which is taken and using the same type of imagery, the same type of camera, essentially, that this is a community that has really just been devastated in its entirety. Everything has been burned, and there's really nothing left. There's the intent here is to wipe out the town and its people in its entirety, and for there to be nothing for anyone to go back to. This is the type of data, though, that, as Quscondy said, we are constantly looking from the skies, often because there's no other alternative. And being able to access this kind of information in real time is still very difficult because we have to contend with clouds and other factors that really severely limit our access. I've been working on Sudan going back to 2011 in South Kordofan, Abyei, and in Blue Nile, and I have to say that in all of that time, we actually had more access on the ground, despite the fact that humanitarian organizations and others and human rights groups were extremely limited. They've been, completely pushed out of those regions, but we still had better information on a day-to-day level for folks on the ground than we do now. That's how comprehensive the information blackout is. So it is deeply challenging to be able to get through and to be able to document this. And the sheer range, the geographic range of what we're trying to document also means that we have our work cut out for us every single day. Here, of course, is the list of also with the speed at which RSF and its actors are working, especially throughout Darfur, means that there's so much to try and make sure that we're keeping up with, and simply trying to make sure that we're capturing every single day, and again at so much speed. So it's I hesitate to say that it's not that it can't be done. It can be done, but the sheer amount of resources that it takes to do this in a comprehensive way means that I'm already leading a team that has some of the, far better resources than we ever could have imagined a decade ago. and it's not enough. We need more. The scope of this effort needs so much more than what it is getting. That's part of the urgent call to action that we're part of here. Back to you, Jawhara.
Thank you, Caitlin, and thank you for making that last remark. So many humanitarian actors and even monitoring and reporting bodies have been asking people to contribute more, and hopefully on the event today we have people in some of the agencies that can actually help push these efforts forward. Thank you for the presentation. Mahasin, we know that the Sudanese who are monitoring, reporting, and documenting human rights violations and other conflict dynamics, that their work is sensitive and dangerous. What situation are human rights monitors facing at the moment, particularly in Darfur? I know, Caitlin have already briefly touched on that, the sensitivity of the issue, and that even for those who leave the country, it's not actually very safe. So if you can share a few comments on what you've been monitoring or following.
And you also, thank you, Jawhara. You also mentioned earlier in your introduction a very specific update on the situation of human rights monitors and defenders. So it's really important to know that the situation in Darfur is highly complex and fluid. The challenges faced by human rights monitors can vary depending on the specific context, the time frame, and the day. Since the outbreak of the war, we saw many initiatives of human rights defenders and others who work in peace building, trying to maintain the social cohesion and prevent an outbreak of war. However, things took a different turn. So we understand that I can say a very general things. I've met a few of my friends and a few lawyers, journalists, and human rights defenders from Darfur in Nairobi last week. What we've been hearing is that there are targeting of human rights defenders, lawyers, and government officials. We all heard about the Darfur governor murder. So the security risks, of course, are high. There is restricted access. So some of the regions in Darfur are simply, trapped. As Quscondy mentioned, people are finding it difficult to share information. There are intimidation and harassment, and the harassment is basically can lead to self-censorship, but in the current case is death. And of course, there is impunity for the perpetrators. There was no accountability before, and now it's very difficult to actually know who are the perpetrators. So we have two common words that are used for RSF and Arab militia, and no one actually can finger point who's in charge, which area specifically, and who's targeting human rights defenders. And this is what I can mention. And also, not only these challenges, is that there are other mental and physical challenges, is that we are dealing with a lot of personal events. And the human rights defenders that are working in this field, especially in Darfur, they have been working since 2003. They have generations of actual lived reality and continuous hits to their own belief systems. So the question should be more into how can we cope to, as human rights defenders, how can we mentally work to have the proper mental support to continue doing this work. It's to me personally, I think we're often looked at as sources of information, but not humans with experience with this information that are both personal, political, and it can actually live with us. So yeah, that's something for us to all think about, is that it's not the people that bring the information, is that what that information means to them personally, and how can we use it? How can we make things go to a certain place that we finally see accountability work, justice, and we can finally see outcomes of the work that's been going on since before the Conflict Observatory, the Sudanese Archive, and everyone else. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahasin, for that thorough answer. I would also like to remind our audience to ask questions either in Arabic or English, and to reach out to you or Caitlin for any verification, or to just get credible sources, credible information from credible sources. The information that Caitlin have shared earlier about reaching out to her, and then also I think the Sudanese Archive is available online for people to reach out. Going back to Quscondy, there is a body of work I'm practicing on preventing and addressing atrocities, including from Darfur's own experience. What do you see being activated at the moment from local communities to the regional and international community? And what are the gaps to turn from monitoring to action?
Thank you. And I would say yes, just taking to what Mahasin is saying, the limited space for the civil society. And for us, we really, really think that all of this, there is no gun big enough to solve Sudan problem. And it is proven in a several time in history that all the problems always, when there's even the toughest regime have been changed by a nonviolent movement, and that is always led by civil society and a stronger Sudanese nonviolent movement bodies. I think there is several initiatives in Darfur region, for instance. Those initiatives are, trying at the tribal level, but also, at different aspects to try to ease the violence. And those mainly successful in some of the areas, they're being able to stop some of the attacks in some of the cities, mainly, in Yala, for instance. At the end, there is still some sort of stability. Despite that, can also be deferred because there is less targeted population of the atrocities in those cities. I think there is a body of the movement that is called, the Sudan, before the Sudanese doesn't know what's the war now. Like people from Darfur, from Nuba Mountain, from South Kordofan have to explain what war means to people in North and people in Khartoum. In this April 15 war now, nobody tells nobody what is war, what war is. Everyone is saw it. And I think this is a uniting factor for all the actors to be able to stand together, and it prevents these two generals from destroying the country. And I see, how, even not only in Khartoum, but in Darfur, how irresponsible, for instance, for the civilians, either victimized by RSF or by SAF. Even SAF itself is not responsible. They actually enjoy seeing their victims killed. The victims killed in some of the cities, like Zalingi, even in Genena, where the city is all destroyed, the Safar is still there in their camps. And that also makes us wonder if there is actual conflict between SAF and RSF with regard to the destruction that's happening in Darfur. So I think there's a lot of opportunity. Some of the most strong is the body of the movement that really need to be reignited despite the limited space. There's other opportunities that's really not being exploited so far is the existing different, international and regional frameworks with regard to humanitarian intervention and civilian protection in Darfur. justice and accountability, sanctioning of some of the leaders, particularly in areas where there is mass atrocities like Junena. And, Caitlin, you just showed the image of Mitmere, and I will tell you, I have, there is other cities that I see in your map where my family is, and it is exactly what happened. Everything is destroyed. People are held hostage. They have to come and pay money. I think 30,000 Sudanese pound. I just can't understand. It's equivalent to $50,000 for protection money to RSF, because the state doesn't exist. It's the total chaos and total risk. So I think the prevention action is really right now. And I think the US itself has, the new atrocity prevention approach. Too many tools not being, very much underexploited so far with regard to what's happening, in Darfur. It's expanding, for instance, in West Kordofan, the violence expanding very, very fastly to other fragile regions. And even when we see East Sudan is very safe, it can easily go in a very, just in a slip of a finger to our violence. I think it is a time to stitch what it exists and try to, make very difficult for the generals, either that is Burhan or Himeti, to make the choice of war more costly. And I think currently there is a lot of incentive, more incentive for the war than there is an incentive for no war. And because of that, it is very easy for generals to wage war. And I think the heaviest sanction possible for these actors could be one of the useful tool and underexploited tool to be able to at least at this moment address some of the ongoing mass humanitarian disaster, but also, potential genocide and war crimes and crimes against humanity that might happen further down. It's rainy season coming, and we all know when it's rainy season, means people already finished more of the food they had in the store, if there was any. The new season didn't come, therefore, so the movement itself is difficult. And morbidity in Darfur, particularly on all the agricultural communities, is high when it is rainy season. Malaria and other associated diseases, which can create, very high humanitarian disaster deaths. So I think there is local tools, which is the strongest civil society body movement, that needs to be reignited as an opportunity. There is civil society and civil administration, for instance, in Darfur context, that can play a very strong role to really be able to play their role, a preventative role, into some of the high-risk areas. For instance, the cities that are being destroyed, most of the people from different tribes stands together because they all have houses. They need a running state in those areas to be able to work. However, after destruction of city like Zalingi, like Junena, it doesn't affect Masalit or Four, it affects everyone who was living. And I think there was a strong initiative for all of this and cross-ethnic, cross-tribes to stand together to prevent an attack and violence inside the city. I think there is a need to reignite those fabrics very strongly and be able to create at least some sort of local shield that can open a window, at least before, things go to danger. But I think immediate humanitarian intervention, because I think food and starvation and medical destruction means, or all other means of survival that have been destroyed, is bridging that gap as immediate as possible can also help prevent some of the, violence and further complication. Over.
Thank you, Quscondy. That was quite helpful. And I echo your notes on the long history of Sudan on the nonviolent action movement and the local peace building initiatives that have been taken place in this conflict and for a long time before. We look forward to finding avenues to support such initiatives to thrive further in this context. Going back to you, Caitlin, You've mentioned that some of the audience might know that Yale has been involved with satellite monitoring in other contexts and countries. How can this information be used in real time to activate atrocity prevention and response? And what is the uptake and degree of attention right now in Sudan?
There's not nearly enough attention and an uptake on Sudan right now. That's the simple answer. And there's so much more that can be done on atrocity response. I think that it is difficult for me personally to use the word prevention when there is so much that is already happening. This is, to talk about warning when we're looking at atrocities that are underway and being successfully executed. That's the reality. That being said, that does not mean that there is nothing we can do. There is so much that we can do. And these tools can be utilized very effectively right now and in the days ahead to do so much to protect so many. So right now, here are some of the things I think we should be doing and that the international community needs to step up and take action on. We need to be utilizing these tools for daily monitoring and assessment on creating a series of evacuation options and contingency plans, especially for areas where displaced persons are now moving too rapidly and gathering, because cities like Nyala, Al Fashir, these are all, yes, because the places that people need to be able to get out of the country, that access is being cut off so effectively, which means that other cities have become gathering points. That also means they become kill boxes. And I hate to use that term, but that is how militaries, it's how armed actors see them. And people need to understand that is what they are right now. So the more immediately we can turn those into evacuation zones effectively, and get boots on the ground to help get people safely out of there, to get humanitarian corridors established for meaningful evacuation, that is what I don't necessarily think that there is an alternative right now for that kind of activity, and that can be supported with the tools that we have right now. We need those options throughout the country too, because these are sophisticated armed actors who have the capacity to pivot just like that. So whenever something is working against them in one area, they'll go to moving chaos and they'll work to achieve their agenda somewhere else. So we need to make sure that we have eyes on the situation throughout the country, in Kordofans, in Abyei, and of course throughout the East, so that there isn't, that there is basically a denial of opportunity for more chaos to be sown, for more civilians to be harmed. And of course, I think that there is a serious need to actually meaningfully go after those, just as Quscondy said. There's so much more that we can be doing to look for those who have evaded justice so far. We know that the lack of accountability for those who were already have warrants out for their arrest, who were not brought to The Hague, as Freedom House and others called for, that has paid dividends right now. It would be helpful to try and figure out where they are, but I think that the immediate needs right now to monitor all of the critical infrastructure to be able to attribute those attacks right now, that's on water plants. We see targeted attacks on water infrastructure. That's one of the first things that has been happening, which of course, as you know, creates much more capacity for waterborne disease to occur, especially potential for cholera outbreaks. There have been systematic and widespread attacks on medical infrastructure. That's one of the things that you'll see documented in our upcoming report on Khartoum, which already has the vast majority of the country's medical infrastructure. These are exactly the things that we have to make sure that we are protecting the most fiercely as we go forward, as well as the personnel who are connected to them. And this is also something that we've seen called for at some very high levels. I mentioned it earlier when it came to protection for those who are speaking out and who are providing some of this most critical evidence, we have to make sure that we have the ability to protect eyewitnesses when they do reach a point of some safety, because the reach of some of these armed actors goes beyond borders. So if we don't have the meaning, if we aren't doing everything that we can to make sure that teams in refugee camps are providing everything that they can to protect these people, to move them further on to further points of safety, then we're not doing enough.
Thank you, Kathleen. And now we turn back again to Quscondy for one final question from our end before we head to the questions shared by our audience. So Quscondy, prior to the war, we were already talking about transitional justice that has not been addressed for Sudan broadly, and therefore 20 years after the genocide. While it's hard to imagine justice in the midst of the ongoing violence, what needs to happen today to ensure path towards justice in the medium term?
Thank you again. And I would, just shortly second of the what Kathleen and Mahasin said. I think one very important key to understand is, and that the justice and accountability doesn't wait. There are several ways that I think with the situation right now in Sudan, particularly, either in Darfur, but also in Khartoum and in other regions where, in the strong South area where the activists is being targeted, but in Darfur where the mass atrocities exist, I think it is not a good time to say, oh, let's wait until there is kind of peace agreement and everything happen and we start justice and accountability. I think the most meaningful justice could be right now. And I think that is start with using and utilizing different tools, tracking all the enablers and supporters of the atrocities. And those includes, those who aid, abide, all of the actors that committing atrocities in Sudan, either within Sudan or within the regional countries. Sanctions. But I think, it is also the time to utilize the ICC, at least start moving the case of Ahmad Harun, for God's sake, and at least sentence. And I think that could at least, show that I think the world is watching what we are doing today, right now, to the people in Midmere, burning down their city and killing them in numbers, mass graves. This will be found one day. And I think it can be also a deterrent factor. So I think one thing that has been done is really to try to increase the monitoring, but also to effectively use the rich information we right now have, bring more witnesses and be able to advance some cases, at least for the accountability. So I think the one thing is, yes, move the cases, target the actors, and this doesn't include, the big names, but also the medium leaders who are currently on the ground commanding all of these atrocities actors to be held accountable. So I think one of these is using the existing frameworks of tools of sanctions, but also, international legal frameworks such as ICC to open some of the cases are current, but also in the previous history of the atrocity in Darfur, to advance those cases for justice and accountability, hold those who are accountable, sentence the one you have placed at the ICC. That could create a deterrent. The second is that really, with regard to justice and accountability, what also plays a role that if those conversations start, it increases, the community, the solidarity, the local resilience, that at least there is somebody in the world who cares about us being killed or raped in a mass. And I think that resilience itself is what victims confined by the conflict needs, even if that is, people in Darfur or people in the Western Kordofan in the recent days violence. I think those are the things that currently need to be done at the policy level and urgent. And I think it could help at least to show the world is watching what is currently happening in Sudan. The second thing with the justice and accountability also has the other aspect, which is, collective memorization, being able to create the tools for people to document, not only just for justice and accountability, to document their story and be able to have those collective memory. I think that is one of the healing process as well while atrocity is happening. And that requires, creating at least safe zones in the region where, internet is provided, communication is available, communities are able to engage, some sort of solidarity mechanism has been created to be able to address the current, but also most recent atrocities that happen in the region. I think that is all I could say, and over to you.
Thank you, Quscondy. If I can just take 1 more or 2 minutes. You've mentioned the ICC a couple of times, but we know that the current mandate of the ICC only extends to Darfur and doesn't cover other parts of Sudan, despite attempts to expand it at the beginning of the war. Is there anything you could say to this? What local, regional, or international efforts can be done in this regard in order to make sure that all these atrocities that are taking place after 15th of April are also accounted for? In addition, can you say anything about universal jurisdiction as a way to overcome the shortcomings and limitations of the current mandate of the ICC? Thank you.
Yes, I think one factor is I'm not a lawyer, but one thing is that the most of the commanders who are involved in the atrocities in Darfur are the one who is responsible in the atrocities outside Darfur. Either those through SAF, which is, their leader, Burhan, was leading operations in Darfur, or either that is RSF, the RSF commanders who are currently commanding the atrocities, either in Al Junaina or Al Zalinji, Ali Yagub, who was one of the people who led the campaign, summer campaigns in the RSF summer campaign in Mara Mountains in 2014, summer campaign 2015, that led to mass atrocities in Jabal Mara area all the way up to the top of the mountains. And I think what is needed is to kind of create a mechanism to connect, to expand the investigation, to be able to do further indictment, but also using the current crimes to add additional charges. And I think that is what at least can help to address some of the atrocities that are happening outside that court. And that is, either that is Kordofan or either that is what is happening in Khartoum. I think what is being also missing with the other regional mechanism, for instance, the African Court of Peoples and human rights and other mechanisms that might be interested into intervening right now. But I think the most important things with regard to justice and accountability is, one, coordinated evidence collection. Second, also coordinated advocacy and collective action. Third is, international support, but also stronger local voices from the victims that are consistently monitoring, but also following the question of justice and accountability, which is currently, due to the war, is mostly being halted. Everyone is running for their safety and security. Most of the people who work on documentation are targeted at risk, either if they are in Darfur or where RSF exists, or either if they are in Sudan's quote-unquote safer area where Sudan Armed Force and national intelligence are very clearly and critically following up. And that also helps the credibility of information. If an activist is in RSF area and want to report, more will say aerial bombardment is happening than other things. If in the other side is, these people are taking our home, even this within the country happen. So I think that is because of the risk that some of the activists have to go and have to navigate to be able to obtain reports.
Thank you, Quscondy, and thank you to all the other panelists for all the information that you've provided. I will now turn to the questions that were posed by our audience. I believe some of them were in Arabic, but they're not translated in English. So hopefully you somewhat find your questions in the translation that I have. I've also tried to group the questions in order to have time to answer as many as possible. Each panelist would have 3 minutes to try and speak to the proposed questions. So for Mahasin, I think you might be best suited to answer these questions unless someone else has an addition. So the first question is about ways to help individuals or people working on collecting open source data in Sudan. How can people assist you or contribute to the work that's been done? And the second question is, are there much safer countries or communities for Sudanese refugees to turn to, or is there a mass exodus overseas? You have 3 minutes, please.
So to us at the archive, we are currently working on and really trying to build a Sudanese task force that works on open source investigation. We have been hosting capacity buildings and sharing our methods of research with a variety of journalists, human rights defenders, etc. What we would love to hear from people and how people can help us is that we can always look for collaborations. Please reach out to us, communicate with us if you are working on certain investigations, if you need proper assistance in geolocation, chronolocation, if you need advice or work done across different platforms, because the Sudanese archive is not separate from Mnemonic. Mnemonic is the umbrella organization for 3 other archives. One of them is the Ukrainian archive, the Yemeni archive, and the Syrian archive. The organization itself has a collective memory and knowledge on using open source information for accountability. All of those are lessons learned that we are happy to share, and we are willing to collaborate with other people to see similar results for Sudan. As for safer places for people to take refuge in, personally, I don't know how to answer this question. To me, this is my first time actually leaving Sudan, taking refuge somewhere else. It was easier for me moving from Khartoum towards the eastern states and then crossing the border to Ethiopia. I think it depends on everyone's location. There are people who look for different things. People look for places where they don't face language barriers, places where they have relatives, places where they have been before. But what I can say is that it is always safer to make sure that your physical well-being, you're physically in a place and you're still alive, other than looking at other factors of language and stuff. There are barriers, of course, but eventually it's a hard circumstance, so we don't know. I honestly don't know how to answer that question better than this. I don't have recommendations for which is safe, because I don't see a place that is safer than what Sudan used to be, at least for me. But I think other people can jump in on this answer.
Thank you, Mahasin, and thank you for sharing your experience. I believe, yeah, as a Sudanese displaced person myself, I believe, yeah, there is no easy answer. But I would say that for us who managed to leave, it was a matter of privilege. Those of us who had resources to leave, those of us who were able to speak languages at neighboring countries, and in some cases, those of us who were able to pay for a visa online to get entry to that country. At the moment, there is no available resorts for Sudanese people to legally go to that are easier and accessible for those who are less privileged in the terms that I've just mentioned. And I would say, no, there is no travel overseas at the moment because people can't simply cross the border. So yeah, people are not going overseas for that matter. I'll turn to Caitlin, and you would also have 3 minutes. There is a question about whether there is a way that the US government, and I don't know if you can speak for the government, but it's more technical, that if there's tech companies such as Google to provide satellite imaging in areas where it's difficult to report atrocities. And also, if you can jump in on this one, how can the US and the international community engage more with the government of Sudan in order to mitigate the effects of conflict and prevent potential spillover? If you can answer any of these, then that's great. Otherwise, I think USIP would be interested in having longer conversations regarding international community involvement.
So I'll definitely start by saying I certainly do not speak for the U.S. government on this. I can only speak in my capacity from Yale. I'm certain that there are there's a fair amount of outreach and constant dialogue that's going on, but that's not something that I'm privy to between the State Department and government of Sudan. And of course, like the sheer amount of complications right now in terms of who is representing what and who is considered a credible representative for which ministries and so forth. All of that is incredibly complicated at the moment. What I can speak to is, I think, on the issue of the tech companies and who's capable of providing what. That is something that where there is a fair amount of facilitation, and companies are doing everything that they can, as far as I'm aware, to image as much as possible. We are working as rapidly as we can and sort of with our own contacts internally at those companies to advocate for more tasking, which is the process of sort of, getting as much imagery taken every single day for that to be collected and disseminated as broadly as possible for those that are doing this critical humanitarian work. So not just for us to access, but for all of those who are doing this to be able to access.
Thank you, Caitlin. And then, Quscondy, there are a few questions that I think you've already answered about the worry of recurrence of genocide in Darfur and so on. However, I wish you can take some of these. Like, there is this question about whether Sudan is worried about recolonization when conflicts arise and outside resources are utilized to settle the conflicts. It can be road to recolonization and not a road to more freedom and autonomy. So the question is whether, you see such trends of recolonization. And then the other question is, what is your perception of dealing with the violations of the RSF? You partially answered that. And do you see any effective means other than supporting SAF to counter RSF, according to the person who asked the question? And you have 3 minutes as well.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I would say with regard to colonization or recolonization, the most dangerous colonization is when you are a failed state and you depend 100% on people to give you aid to survive. And currently, we have a country with over 40 million, and we are almost 80% or 90% need aid to survive, meaning that we accept it or not, we are totally dependent. And I think that is where we become a burden to everyone. And I think, with that regard, I just want to say that we have to have two. We have also as a local level to have some of the policies. But I think for the Sudanese people, they can be very, very, very much learn from the history of the experience on how people are resilient, how state building will be coming, and that the future did not relies on us, kind of sticking together and, finding some solutions from ourselves. And those shouldn't be military solutions. The second thing on the RSF and stuff, I think there is, this April 15 war create a false dichotomy. The false dichotomy is that there is nothing else. There is RSF, there is SAF. No, there is a lot in the middle. And there is a body of movement that actually removed RSF and SAF join together with the Bashir and put them outside the power. And that's the body of Sudanese movement. And I think, creating these two ideals, SAF or RSF, doesn't, it serves not a Sudanese democratic transition questions, but I think with regard to Darfur and the RSF violence, for instance, is more concentration because currently the SAF doesn't have power, doesn't have any interest to protect civilians in Darfur. They actually enjoy. In some of the cities, actually SAF get out of their barracks and come and go with the RSF friends, loot whatever and commit the crimes. So it doesn't make any sense just because RSF is the main actors committing the crime. They're criticizing that because all of these are commanders under the command of the RSF. Criticizing that doesn't necessarily mean supporting SAF. And I think that is one thing to be clear, because if you ethnically target people and kill them and burn their houses down, and you can't preach democracy, that just doesn't make a sense. And that is very naive to believe. But I think one additional thing that I want to add is with regard to these two dynamics. In 1985, Sudanese, our great, grandfathers went and stormed Khartoum. They cut the head of the Gurdum Basha, one of the strongest military force in the world at that time. What happens after a few years? The royal forces came back, stormed Khartoum, and ruled Sudan for over 90 years. In 1964, we removed Abu. We have, in 1985, the Sudanese have the Jafar Numeri, one of the strongest dictators in the continent. We have SPLM with more than 15 or 17,000 military fighting Numeri. Who removed Numeri? As the civil society and nonviolent movement. The same with the Bashir, 30 years. We have more than 5 armed movements in Darfur, South Kordofan, Blue Nile, with forces combined for over 100,000 active military forces fighting. Who removed Bashir? The non-violent movement. The big arms that exist in Khartoum and Al-Fashir is not a solution to Sudanese problem. They only promote the greedy division of those who hold the arm. And I think it's the time for Sudanese to reunite their voices, even how limited the space is. The gun have never solved our problem, and it will never solve Sudan problem. And everyone is a political party or resistance committee thinking I will cheer this one to help me carry out to the freedom. No, it just help you to carry you to its own a new jail and a new prison, and also reverse the country's future. And I think it is a time for all the civic actors to reunite their voice. It's time for solidarity healing, and it is a time for collective actions to be taken. And there is a very big vacuum of the voices that are being silenced after April 15, because now those people with the big guns are the one we see on the TV, we see them on the video, we cheer them. But every time you cheer them, you actually, sending a signal of anti-democratic signal. And I think this is something that everyone and all Sudanese need to learn. The way out is not big arms from Russia, it's not big arms from Egypt, it's not big arms from Emirates. The way out is the loudest voices on the street. We need democracy and nonviolent movement. That is all my remark, and over to you, Bob.
Thank you, Quscondy, for reminding us of the strength of the Sudanese nonviolent movement across the years. Thank you, Mahasin and Caitlin, for taking time off your busy work schedules to be here on this platform today and answering all the questions that were mentioned. As I mentioned earlier, USIP would be interested in having similar platforms where more issues are being discussed. There were questions on civilian platforms, there were questions about international communities engagement and so on. We would be interested in taking these conversations further. And I know we can spend hours and hours talking about the current issues in Sudan. As for today, our time has come to an end. Thank you to our audience across the world, to our interpreters who made sure that we include as many people as possible, and to the team that has been supporting bringing this to life. Until another time, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this event. If you'd like to listen to more events or explore our other podcasts, visit usip.org/podcasts.